Well, the election is over, and now, as things relax, we get a chance to kind of sit back on the giant lazy boy of life and gaze into our glorious future as a country. Certainly, the past will be no comparison to the wonders and the glory that are coming our way. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And this Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, I saw a little story on the Drudge Report, and I wasn't inclined to read it, but I did, and I wasn't inclined to go much deeper into it, but I did, and I can't say it surprised me, but it did. It triggered me, is what it did. So here we find that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez joins climate protest in Pelosi's office. So there are people who are protesting climate change in Nancy Pelosi's office, and more people are outside protesting, and in comes the Democratic Socialist and says, I just want to let you know how proud I am of each and every single one of you. And I'm going to just give a couple of quotes because I kind of want to show people just what kind of trouble we really are in. First of all, it's surrounded in this video. She's surrounded by people that are just gazing up at her in absolute wonder. And you know, you don't have to be an idiot to be a socialist, but it helps. And here's what the upcoming member of Congress said. I just want to let you know how proud I am of each and every single one of you for putting yourselves and your bodies and everything on the line to make sure we save our planet. We don't have a choice. We've got to get to 100% renewable energy in 10 years. There is no other option. Now, that's a lot to unpack there. Scott, Steve, actually, I changed it. Steve, let's start with you. One of the methods that the left uses to gain the moral superiority that they think trumps everything is to glorify victimhood and violence, being a victim of violence especially, and so they use language like this. And what do you think of the idea that these rich white kids who are in there put themselves and their bodies and everything on the line to make sure we save our planet? Because I do know some people who put themselves and their bodies and everything on the line, and they don't look like these people. They're wearing uniforms.
Yeah, this is exactly where I was going to go with that. Showing up at Nancy Pelosi's office with a poster and some of your friends is exactly like storming the beach at Normandy or going out on patrol in bandit country in Afghanistan. Your body is on the line. We're not sure exactly how, but it is. And, okay, here's the thing about progressivism. They got their first big inroad in this country in World War I. Woodrow Wilson was president, and the war was an excuse to start all of these new federal agencies to gain all this new control over the country and the economy and education and all the rest. And since then, you look at progressive history, and it's not just left progressives, right progressives have done this too. Jimmy Carter talked about the moral equivalent of war on our energy policy. Richard Nixon launched his war on drugs, which has been just a huge disaster and destroying the Bill of Rights. And it's always the moral equivalent of war, because this reflects their first big success in this country in World War I. It's what they know. Roosevelt did the exact same thing. He didn't have a war to go to, but he had the Great Depression. And one of my favorite things is you had two left-leaning UCLA economists about 10, 12 years ago who did a study and concluded that FDR's war on the New Deal, war on the Great Depression, his New Deal, extended the Great Depression by 7 years. They're not about results, Bill. The progressives are about control. And any excuse, whatever the problem is, whatever crisis they gin up or legitimate, it doesn't matter. The answer is always the same. You need to give us your money, and you need to give us your rights so that we can do what we think is best to you. I mean, for you. And we're seeing more of this. And my first instinct was this protest in Nancy Pelosi's office was what I like to call hot blue on blue action. But it's not. This is ginning up the base with it's kabuki. It's a show. Nancy knew they were coming, of course, and they didn't do anything that was actually disruptive to her office. This is putting on a show to keep the base riled up. Because let me tell you, Nancy Pelosi and Elijah Cummings and some of the other Democratic leadership during the election put on a show of, you can trust us with power because we're not going to get all crazy with the subpoenas or the impeachment talk or any of that. We just need to bring back some sane, sensible government to this crazy Trump administration. And that's what they ran on. But it was actually the crazies who got them elected, and now they've got to pay those constituents off. And Democrats are very, very good at that kind of constituent service. And what we saw today, Bill, in the speaker's or the soon-to-be speaker's office is just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, one of the things that I'm most interested in is I try to point out to people the ideological filters that are put on them by language. And more often than not, we are complicit in our own annihilation in this regard. We refer to these people as social justice warriors. We should be referring to them as teenage whiners. There's nothing warrior about them. They're not risking their lives. They're not risking body and limb. They're just plain complainers and agitators. So we grant them this status that they so desperately need to keep themselves going. Steve did a perfect job of talking about the putting our lives and our bodies on the line. But one of the things that Ocasio-Cortez said was, we've got to do this in order to save the planet. And you can tell from the looks of the people in this photograph and from the enormous amount of the enormous majority, I should say, of the upcoming generations actually believe that it is about saving the planet. It's not about stopping sea level rise by a foot or half a foot or 2 feet or 10 feet. It's actually saving the planet, which will turn into a sterile cylinder if we don't do something right quick. You can't use that kind of language. You can say, listen, we should do something about the climate. There are consequences to climate change. You can say that, but no one can say you will be saving the planet if you're aware of the fact that 85 million years ago in southern Colorado was under 2 miles of water, and 85,000 years ago, 85 million, 2 miles of water, 85,000 was under a mile of ice. So we're not talking about a mile of ice. We're not talking about the center of the United States being 2 miles underwater. In the worst case, we're talking about 2 or 3 feet of sea level rise. And so when they say they're saving the planet, they are reinforcing their own sense of importance, and they're also reinforcing their own fear and their own ignorance. Speaking of ignorance, Scotty, here is a candidate who is a perfect representation of these people, a person who doesn't know anything, really. Now, we've had this conversation many times, including on our backstage show. I think the fact that she's a bartender is actually a good thing. I'm 100% in favor of citizen legislators. I'm just against idiot legislators. And when I say idiot, I'm not saying that these people are stupid. Obviously, you look at some of these students in this picture, they're obviously pretty bright kids. When I say an idiot, I'm saying somebody who is so determined to avoid looking at reality that it requires a fair amount of brain power to actually do the gymnastics. So here is a person. Scott, this is what I'd like you to address. We talk about living in a democracy, and those of us who know a little bit say we live in a republic. So there are 310 million Americans that live in a republic, but there are 535 Americans that actually live in a democracy. There are 535 Americans, 435 representatives plus 100 senators that live in an actual democracy because they get to vote on pretty much everything that happens. When one of those people says that we have 10 years to get to 100% renewable energy, and the most crazy optimistic view of renewable energy is perhaps 10 or 15% in 50 years. Perhaps. This is telling me that we have a problem, because if you're sending people to Congress, it would be nice if they could add, as an example.
Well, Bill, I think I'm not being facetious about this at all. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, whether she is conscious of this or not, has done something brilliant here. She has named a problem. She has given a time frame for solving that problem. So these are the two setups for the movie. If you're going to have a movie, there's got to be some sort of a crisis, and there's got to be a time frame for that crisis. And then she has called on the highest aspirations of her audience. And all three of those things were actually fairly brilliant. Nobody's going to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and knock on doors for your 2020 congressional reelection campaign because at some distant point in the future, we're hoping to incrementally bring down the level of the ocean or drop the temperature 1.5 degrees Celsius. She understands that you need to frame this in terms of a crisis, and then you need to call on this person to save the world. It's not saying, I'm not calling on you to see if we can get a few more renewable energy operations rolling in this country. I'm calling on you to save the world. And the reality is that mockery term of social justice warrior is actually, it was meant as ridicule. But there's a part of it with which these folks resonate. These SJW folks resonate because every one of us wants to be the hero of the story. We all want to do something great. Now, the only problem is, in order to do something great, you've got to do something. And most people aren't willing to do anything. So these same people who are putting their bodies on the line outside of Nancy Pelosi's office, and she's not just tolerating them there, she invited them there. Come on. So not only are they not really doing anything there other than listening in doe-eyed wonder to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but they are then going to get on their $1,000 iPhones and call themselves an Uber or a Lyft and go back to their hotel.
And talk about socialism.
And they're not willing to put down any of those things in order to take up the banner for the fight to save the planet.
You know, it's well known. It's not even mythology anymore. Now it's just plain trite. But I mean, my life story is a story of a guy who wanted to be a fighter pilot. Then I became a filmmaker, and those are very different things. But when people have asked me why did I get into the politics, I really didn't know how to answer that. It was certainly never my intention, I suddenly realized that the reason I think I got into the political commentary is because I'm a fighter by nature and I hate injustice. I hate it, and it's intolerable to me. And I started writing when everybody was putting this country down about a year or two after 9/11 and the big liberal pushback, we deserved it, it's our fault if we weren't there, blah, 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 blah. We're for oil, all. I said, it's wrong, it's not fair. I went to Arlington, I know this is a good country. I can't stand to hear people talk about it like it's not. It's unfair, it's unjust. So this is why these things bother me so much. I find it an incredible injustice for this person to tell people who've never done anything more strenuous than have an internet outage that lasted 5 or 6 minutes, that they are putting their lives on the line to make sure they save the planet, because those are people 1 or 2 generations below me, and the generation 1 above me actually did these things. They actually did them. They actually put themselves and their bodies and everything on the line in order to save the planet. They did that. And the injustice is that these kids who are supporting this woman don't know that. They can't know it. They can't be allowed to know it. They cannot be allowed to know it. Because here's the thing about this. These people are loving the fact that she's a socialist. And I said, you don't have to be an idiot to be a socialist, but it helps. It's true. But there is one requirement to being a socialist, and that is that you must be able to erase the past. And this is what George Orwell understood so beautifully in 1984. You must be able to control the past. So let's just take a look, since we're fisking this entire 1 or 2 sentence statement on her part. She said, we don't have a choice. We have to get to 100% renewable energy in 10 years. There is no other option, ... brackets, for us to save the planet. So 10 years from now, when the planet is still here, and we're not at 10% renewable energy, will anybody say, President Cortez, you said 10 years ago that if we didn't get to 100% renewable energy, we would be finished, that the planet would be dead. Anybody going to hold them to that? No. Al Gore said in 2005, we have 10 years or else the planet is done for. And Rush Limbaugh, a genius at this kind of thing, immediately started the planet Earth death clock, and started counting down the 10 years. And guess what? 10 years happened, and we're still here. Planet's still here. If you cannot erase the past, you cannot be a socialist. If the past of socialism and the endless failures that have come from it and the endless murders that have come from it, if they're remembered, then they are simply out of business. So what they do is they make sure that these young people have no idea what their grandparents did. None. And they have no idea about what the planet has been like, how hot it's been, how cold it's been, how high carbon dioxide has been, how low it's been. They're not allowed to know that either. If they're going to follow somebody like this woman, who strikes me as probably a pretty decent person, who's just as ignorant as the rest of everybody else, they have to be stupid. And in the age of the internet, you have to be made stupid. You have to be taught to be stupid. You have to be taught how to not ask questions. And this is the existential threat to this country. Demographics is destiny. And the main reason I wanted to cover this story is because right after this, I read a story where somebody was on the far left was deconstructing the recent election. And they said, look, there's not one single demographic that is in the Republicans' favor. They're getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And they're right. So if we don't get in front of the future, we won't have one. The good news is, telling these people the truth, it's kind of fun watching their eyes light up, like Kanye West, all of a sudden realizing, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. You can flip them in 3 minutes, but you got to get to them first. And if we don't start thinking about the future of this country, instead of talking about the past, we're not going to have a future to talk about. This message and others are made possible by the paying members of BillWhittle.com, a small group of people who have the vision and the generosity to keep this light of common sense and reason, that's all it is, alive in a world that's getting darker. And the more help you have, the more light we can shine. We sure would love to have you over there at BillWhittle.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.